Welcome back. We are at the Troponin episodes, episode 21. Friendly reminder, if you're enjoying this content, you can get a lot more of it at teamtroponin.com. Remember to turn on notifications, like, subscribe, drop us a comment. Let us know if you are Team Guac or Team Nut Butter and Team Lift Happy or Team Lift Angry. This is another one we'll get into another day. We're going to kick off today's episodes talking about something that you wouldn't necessarily expect from female competitors, and that would be the use of synthol.
Yeah, which is
Justin, do you
odd.
want to
Yeah,
take it over?
yeah. So I think just in general to set the tone, synthol use is really, I don't want to say minimal because someone listening will be like, I know someone who uses it. Synthol use at the highest levels really is pretty minimal now. Not that it doesn't get used, but that's kind of misleading because uh, because anytime you inject something, that area locally gets some level of synthol effect. There's localized inflammation. A lot of it is just inflammation from the irritation of the compound crystallizing out of solution, irritating the tissues. But there's also fluid volume, and that stuff lasts. Really does. There's nothing magic about synthol that's different than the grapeseed oil or whatever that's in your gear. Like people think synthol is something special. It was like MCT oil with a little benzo alcohol. Now some of the stuff might have more stuff in it, silicone or something, I don't know, but it's really just oil. And basically what happens is like oil enters the area, it doesn't dissolve right away. And anyone who's taken, like you've taken a bad glute injection, it could be a week where it's still painful. And if it's painful, there's a lot of fluid in the area. And if you don't believe me, look up any abscess video and watch how much fluid comes out from an abscess that's only slightly swollen. Yeah, so, but that's really it, but if it's painful, there's a lot of fluid there. So even if it's not painful, there's still a lot of fluid there. And, it spikes and it slowly trails off and it goes asymptotically to zero. But that 0 point is sometime way out in the future, way out in the future. And I can say for myself, just from when I left and went back to grad school, it was probably close to 2 years before places like my delts and glutes really lost all of the inflammation and volume from whatever, I had been taking up to that point. And so with the guys, you have so much more fluid volume and if you don't believe that, you can see guys who've retired, like Jay Cutler's side delts are a really good example, or my side delts, if you ever saw it, you really see how they flatten out. And part of that is because the tissue's dead from all the scar tissue from the needle pokes. Every time you stick a needle through there's some level of scarring that the body does in response to that damage. And that tissue will flatten out. And you'll see a lot of guys almost with like divots in their side delts or like a King Kamali's biceps currently, or even, his triceps, I think even also. But with the guys, there's just so much injection volume and you don't need that much because by the time you're a pro, you've been injecting for a decade, and it's not like that first shot a decade ago and your delta is still there, but for quite a long length of time, it's there beforehand. So you get a real synthol type effect just from spot injecting, not even intentionally spot injecting. And spot injecting, you're going to get some localized increase in androgen receptor, filling in that area. And in the delts, a little bit more pronounced because I think the delts have the highest concentration of androgen receptors. But that's not it doesn't cause localized growth like that. It causes just localized swelling. And it sticks around a long time. Now, the girls don't take the injection volume that the guys do. And so, the one thing I always kind of want to talk about, but I think is interesting because I think most people wouldn't expect it, is the vast majority of synthol questions I get are from female competitors, almost always in physique, sometimes in figure. And if you look at some of the girls' delts in figure and physique, the side delts, especially, I think you could really kind of see. And the reason is because they don't do the injection volume. You get a guy, especially if he's using short esters or 100 milligrams, if he's using 3 grams a week or 100 milligrams, that's 30 cc's a week. That's enough to get a synthol effect, for sure, where a girl's not going to be using 30 cc's a week. They're not even going to be using 3. And so something I think is really interesting that you don't really hear about, but in my experience, my female clientele, and it's not like I'm saying my clients do this. These are just questions I get. And I think one of the worst things in the sport is that there's that stigma where people don't want to ask questions that everyone has. Everyone has these questions, but people are kind of embarrassed because everyone knows, just about everyone's probably tried synthol. Maybe not everyone, but everyone's curious about it or wants to know about it. But everyone knows that if they ask and they ask the wrong person, they'll get put on blast. And, and I'm not I wouldn't even say even my clients ask it, but it seems like probably 75%, I would guess, of the questions I get about Synthol are from females. That's across the board, from just random DMs, random emails, website inquiries, clients, whatever. Where, I mean, my clientele for females is less than 40% for sure, and my analytics on my websites and stuff are probably less than 15% female interaction. So I think it's really interesting how that's kind of where the sport is, and it's also probably linked to the fact that coaches seem to be willing to push their female clients more past the like generally assumed status quo of health than they are with the men for whatever reason. And a lot of, I think probably because it's such a niche sport for the women that the ones who make it are, because you think, when we've talked about this, you take the men that make it are the extreme of the extreme. Well, there's still a much bigger population. So the women that make it are the extreme end of the bell curve of the bell curve, I mean, so there you really get the women that make it are dedicated, they're willing to do anything, which is why the girls are always in shape, because anyone who's willing to, you're so far outside the norm as a top female competitor that you're basically the top, anyone who goes anywhere in the sport, you're already the top 5% of what the male population would have been. And that top 5% of the male population are the people who are never out of shape either. But I think that's something that's really interesting. And you can really see it, I think, at the higher level, especially the difference between state and then like junior national type level versus pro qualifier and pro level on the side belts and figure and physique.
I feel like especially, so figure has that really, really round look, and I feel like physique just has that density. And just having been in a couple pro shows this year, some of these girls, like the figure girls' delts are absolutely insane. And of course, I'm sitting there like, my head under a rock being like, oh, that's just because they train really hard. It probably is. But you kind of wonder, how many of these girls really are kind of taking any other exogenous stuff kind of to that next level.
Yeah, well, you have two things
especially
going
with
on.
females in the sport right now. Go ahead.
Oh, I think you broke up. I thought you were done talking. Well, you kind of have two things going on, because you have like the largest density of androgen receptors in the adults already, and so for women, you're going to get a more dramatic effect in deltoid development just from that. But also, yeah,
Right.
it's not specific to the side belt, which is kind of what I'm talking about.
I have kind of a tangent of a question. So you mentioned that even with just site injections, like that localized inflammation is basically what drives this process, or whether it's an actual gear shot or just something like Synthol. Would that be a reason to actually use gear that's like a little bit painful or doesn't agree with you very well if you could stand the pain? Like, would you actually want to maximize the inflammation that you get from any given shot?
Yeah, I really don't know, and I thought about that because it's like an interesting question, because hypertrophy is an inflammatory response. Like arachidonic acid is like a purely inflammatory omega-6 fatty acid that was marketed as an anabolic compound because just solely on the basis that it's so inflammatory. And ibuprofen is a hindrance to muscle growth because it's anti-inflammatory. We've talked about metformin over and over again in CMPK or cyclic AMP. So I don't really know. My thought would be that because with the inflammation, there's damage to the tissue, and long term, I think you're going to get some potential decrease in hypertrophy potential, but that's long term, where I'm talking like years or even a decade. But I really don't know. But it's something I've like kind of tried to work through first principles, but I can't, because just because something is inflammatory doesn't automatically mean there's a hypertrophy response. I mean, you get the flu and you're inflamed everywhere. You're not growing.
I got asked a question by Sam Brown this week. If you guys don't know Sam, he was with Elite FTS for a long time. He's on a lot of their videos. And he was asked a question posted back to me about, does all the compression expansion stuff that's going on social media really matter? And I want to kind of reframe that as that if you're not familiar with those concepts, what these people are talking about is through the rib cage, spine, a lot of postural stuff, for lack of a better word. There are quite a few people talking about, oh, well, everything's over compressed or it's an expansion strategy. Those things are very true. But the question was, are those concepts relevant to powerlifting and bodybuilding? And 100%. The idea of being able to compress or expand is really regarding airflow in our rib cage. And if we think about it, the rib cage is important because every time we breathe, obviously it has to move, but it's also the fulcrum from which a lot of our muscles attach onto and then move off of. So if it's positioned in a way where those muscles don't have mechanical leverage, obviously that's going to cause a problem. From an injury standpoint, very often what I see is especially in our population, training is compression. Like training is just an allocation of compression. And very often our body is going to respond in a way that allows us to expand, to stay upright against this thing called gravity that pulls us down while moving weight. So you can think about that from the joint perspective, but then the other component to that, if you're more worried about performance, like for me, if someone tells me your joints are kind of jacked, sorry, we just had a message come through. If someone tells me my joints are jacked, I'm like, great, I don't care. I want to train and perform. Where this really goes is if you live in either a compressed or overly expanded state, kind of what you've done is take the pendulum of movement and you have shortened it and skewed it. So you're really only living in one portion. And if you're an athlete who wants to pose well and maybe like, I don't know, externally rotate on stage, obviously with open hands for men's open bodybuilding, or be able to hit a lat spread or anything else, you have to be able to stay outside of the skewed and shortened pendulum of movement. So I hope that makes sense. There are a lot of layers to this. I'll go into a deep dive on Team Troponin because this is, it was actually before we restarted this podcast, I sat here going, man, how do I tackle this one? Because it's so important, not only from the longevity standpoint, but from the pain management, from the good output standpoint, from the joint centration standpoint, from the arthrokinematics, to training the ability to achieve a certain range of motion and pose. It really comes down to, can your body strategize in a way that allows full range of motion and allows you to access that when it counts?
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
I have a question. You said posing and the like front double bicep, for example. That was always a terrible pose for me. I could never open my lats. And so my thought would always be, I'll work on external rotation of my shoulder, but that wouldn't fix anything. So like what could someone like me do to improve the ability to hit that pose properly?
Mm-hmm. Really good question. So what's the other component that you look at with external rotation? I'm going to pull this back.
Like none.
Thoracic extension is
Okay.
what people say a lot. Like
well, that's where I failed. That's where I failed because I didn't look fast.
Okay, so now we know.
Upper back makes sense.
Yeah, that's again. I could pick apart in a good way some of the training with the upper back stuff for you too. But when we're thinking about, for example, hitting a back double bicep, someone who doesn't have external rotation, very often it's kind of, if we come back to first principles, okay, well, what does the shoulder sit on? It sits on the scapula. What's the scap sit on? The rib cage. What's the rib cage doing? Is it flexed forward? Is it too flat? And for most of us, and Dave, I looked at your one of your training videos for your left side where your elbow's all cranky right now. And for a lot of us, our thoracic spine is already flattened, which is in position of extension, which is compression, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So the people who want to be like overly academic about it or overly big words, when they're talking about compression, they're talking about where things basically stuck moving on one side of the pendulum. So if you want to be able to hit your external rotation and your thoracic extension, your back double bicep, you might actually need to recalibrate into a little flexion first so that you can extend.
I would have done the exact opposite.
And you're in really good company. I actually have a guy I just wrote a program for today who like he tries to hit his front double or his back double and he literally like does this. And one of the first things I'm looking at with him is repositioning and reorienting the rib cage, because a lot of times when you actually position that, all the other relational issues between scap, humerus, elbow, and then supination at the elbow and hand all resolve. But if the base and the foundation that rotational mechanism is sitting on has it skewed one direction, that whole chain is going to be skewed.
I was going to ask for like kind of a movement specific example. And at first I was thinking about maybe something lower body, but selfishly, since you mentioned the elbow issue, I think this is probably something a lot of people deal with. And just in short, I've been having some left shoulder pain, but also like right elbow tendonitis when I press. And I don't think the issue is actually at the elbow. It's probably more upstream from that. And I don't usually have these upper body issues, but I think it's probably related to some of what Danny was talking about. So if you were going to like pick that apart a little bit more, what do you think?
Yeah, that's a really good one.
Issue?
And I'll try to keep this surface level so that it's not too nerdy. Yeah. But if you pull up your video where you're doing your brace lat pull down, there comes a point in the motion where your scap stops moving. Mm-hmm. And past that point, you literally can just see your shoulder joint kind of getting pulled.
Just crank forward.
And not even cranked forward. It's just the whole motion is just jerked on that joint. So I wouldn't even call it traction.
Do you mean on the eccentric my scap stopped moving?
Yeah, okay. On the left side. And you can see that not only does the scap stop moving, but the shoulder stops rotating. And then your elbow has to do a whole lot more motion to get through the rest of that eccentric. But when you look at really what's happening at the scap, why is it not moving well? And his whole thoracic spine, his whole left rib cage is really, really flat, which again is compressed. If we think about expansion, being able to actually, because the whole compression expansion thing is it's fluid movement, right? In air movement, air quality, not air quality, respiratory dynamics. So when he breathes in, and you can see it here, this is his expansion versus, lean forward for a sec, being able to actually expand here to create a little bit of curvature throughout his thoracic spine so that the scap, which is inherently a curved bone, can sit on a curved surface.
Is it fair to describe it like basically I need my upper back to maybe turtle shell just a little bit more than it is currently? Or is that oversimplifying?
I wouldn't say turtle shell because that drives a lot of movement here. And that's one of the other big compensatory mechanisms that I see when it comes to, if we pull this back again to everyone that wants to talk about compression expansion, the strategy that people will use if they are compressed is expanding here. They're trying to drive first and second rib into a position of really, really weird rotation. So I think the big picture with that is I would be more selective with your rowing movements. I would do something that allows you to get a better brace so that you can actually allow your sternum to move back. And at the end of your eccentric, before you start, inhale, feel that fill, and then go through.
Okay. You say better brace because I'm not really going to be able to get that, what we're calling this, the expansion or the compression.
More than that, well, I'm going to keep it even more simple. I'm going to say better brace so that you can keep the surface moving where you want it or not moving. So big picture, people are talking a lot about this compression expansion stuff because it's been very trendy through a school of thought. I don't want to pin this on PRI, but that's where a lot of the respiratory mechanics from. And generally, as soon as we're talking compression expansion, the next words you're going to hear are inhalation, exhalation, bias, and or strategy. Those things are really important for us in iron sports. We're not going to sit here and like inhale, exhale as we row. Like we're gonna load, we're gonna stabilize, and we're gonna put tension on a muscle. And I think that the big picture is as long as you're positioned well, you should be able to find joint congruency. And if the joint congruency is on point, you're going to be compressed somewhere. It's probably just going to happen. Be okay with it. But I think it's really important to keep in mind that the compression expansion is really just telling us where we're allocating stress to intentionally and or unintentionally, if that makes sense. So again, for you, just think about what the surfaces are doing, what the joint surfaces are doing, and if they're moving well versus if they're not, then there's probably something funky going on with rib cage.
Right. And you reiterate the rib cage thing because I think a lot of people don't realize. Some people don't even want to call it a joint, but basically the scapula moving on the rib cage.
Oh man, like if there's one thing that has changed how I view everything with regards to movement, bracing, clinical, and training, it's been an appreciation for the rib cage. That thing is so freaking fluid. You think about it, every single one of those ribs has to attaches to a point in our thoracic spine, and on the front of that, the whole like front bottom 2/3 is cartilage. So if you want to talk about something that's going to have structural change based on the demands we put on it in training, pretty sure that cartilage is one of those things that can have a lot more structural change. So for listeners, go out, literally look at an anatomy app and just, or even just pictures on Google, and appreciate that like this cylinder, if you turn it up and down, like that thing has to be fluid and move. And it's kind of like a hula hoop. So when there's deformation, that's a stress and an adaptation we're putting on that tissue, just like we're asking muscles to adapt, like we're asking any other portions of our body to adapt.
You said app, anatomy app. Is there an app where you take a body and move it, or because? Yeah,
I have a couple videos that I've. God, I'm such a fucking ribcage nerd. Sorry, I saw that phone. I'm such a ribcage nerd.
We flag ourselves for mild language that kids that's not age appropriate for children. So you're okay.
Okay.
You can say shit, fuck, cocksucker. Yeah, we have to blurt out donkey raping shit eater, but that's about it, I believe.
I get super excited about the rib cage, and I have like 4 videos made that I have yet to upload to Team Troponin because I don't like how any of them came out. But I have an app where I actually zoom out and I like move things around. You can even see like where certain organs are, because that's the other component to this, is that not only does it have to move every single time we breathe, but we have a heart on one side above it and we have a liver below it on the other. Left and right hemidiaphragms are not the same. They have different attachments to our hip flexors. They attach to different portions of our spine. Our lymphatic system's not symmetrical. Our circulatory system's not perfectly symmetrical. So we have this inherent asymmetry, and the rib cage is so often where that torque is displayed.
Which I think is really, because we have our outer shell is symmetric. We're very symmetrical in our surface, but inside we're not. Yeah, I always thought that was interesting.
And one of the things that I look at a lot in terms of like how I start treating people ask me a lot, like, how do you do PT online? I'm like, well, there are a lot of certain landmarks I look at. One of the first ones I look at is the infrasternal angle, right where that cartilage comes together. And if I were seeing someone in person, I kind of palpate and look at what's actually happening in the undersurface of the rib, and I look at how it moves and shoulder flexion and stuff like that. But you can actually look at, wide versus a narrow and where things flare out, if it deviates a certain way. And that tells you so much about the demands this person has put on their body. Because at the end of the day, wherever we position ourselves, our body's going to try and put air, and it's going to find us a strategy that allows us to inhale and allows us to stay upright and adapt to whatever load we're putting on it. So that's one of the big hallmarks I look at. And again, there are so many great people out there that are good resources, but yeah, I think the rib cage is one of those things that has completely changed how I treat from a PT standpoint and how I train and train my clients. So
speaking of symmetry, why when I look in a mirror and I raise my right arm, my left arm gets raised in the mirror, so I have left-right symmetry, but there's no top-down symmetry. And if I lay on my side, it becomes top-down symmetry, because if I lay on my side and hold my left arm up, now the mirror knows top and bottom.
That mirror is just tricky, man.
For real? Does anyone know why?
Well, my brain went on a separate tangent that was...
That's like I just always thought that was, it's like, I don't think it's a difficult question. I think it has to do with like our eyes really, but and the fact that we're left right symmetric. But my kids think it's really interesting.
I was about to go on a nerd tangent about mirror neurons, and then I was like, no,
do it. I was going to go on I was going on a pothead tangent about mirrors, so yours is way better.
Mirror neurons are super interesting. It's why, like, if you ever watch someone train, so like if someone watches you train, Justin, they'll lift like you. And it's very much related to mirror neurons and how we replicate movement based on what we see. So like if you go to a powerlifting meet and you like watch people fail their third squat and then you go to do your third squat, don't do that.
That's very interesting. Nerd out on that. I want to hear more.
But yeah, if you watch people's training videos, or like if you watch people, like when I train with Dave, my deadlifts are always better because I watch him and he's got a way better hip hinge than I do because I'm super back dominant.
Yeah, Dave's deadlift form is brilliant.
It's really actually unfair.
Childbearing hips and dump truck ass.
Yeah, you do have kind of a dump truck back there. You gonna go wellness next year?
I might have to drop a few pounds, but yeah, sure.
And maybe shave a lot more. Yeah,
I never knew that mirror neurons. I don't think I've never read anything on that.
The powerlifting thing's interesting because you mentioned like people watching a third squat and failing. If you watch any of the best lifters, they're not watching the person ahead of them intently. They're just thinking
that's very interesting. Yeah,
well,
that's really.
If you get ready to lift, like if you're getting ready to go train for the day, you know how everyone has like those lifters they really like to watch. I think some of it is because inherently there's a part of us that knows we move a little bit like or unlike that particular person. So someone will say like, I love watching Eddie Cohn deadlift, and that person is almost always built like Eddie Cohn. They are blessed.
Yeah.
But if you watch other people who. Like who do I like to watch lift? God, that's a short list these days. But I would love to watch Meadows training videos before I train, just because the quality of his execution is so neurologically, to me, fascinating. He's so explosive and so controlled at the same time. And for me, when I train like that, my joints generally feel better. So if I can replicate and execute, for some reason, it's more than just having the mind in the right place. There is actually a neurological reason for that. So
there's individuality there too, because I think like just objectively, I think Meadows' execution was excellent, but it's like it didn't speak to me quite so much. And so if I watch someone, it'll be someone who's like maybe like 90% on the like the pristine end of the technique range, but not so much that like the load's really compromised. So like I would watch
JP.
Jordan Peter.
Yeah.
Yeah. JP. Hollingstead, I think, is a great example. I mean, he's so strong, but his
Yeah.
technique is also damn near perfect. Or like even like
But you can even look at your development and your shape compared to theirs, and it's very, very similar, right? Like you have that very, very sturdy, put together kind of.
I always thought that was interesting because I feel like my long-term training partners over the years have had very similar. People would always talk about Steve Kukla and I having similar builds, which I didn't feel like we were like. If you took both of us pre-working out, I think we looked quite a bit different. And there was my first training partner, Mike Hickey. We'd get that a lot. It was, I mean, we didn't have the development to really appreciate it then, but but people would, comment about that, like that we look the same. That's really interesting.
Yeah. I think the way you execute a rep, I think it's one of those things that needs to just be individualized a little bit. And you can't just teach it through a book.
Yeah. But even looking at like the Team Full ROM guys, like they have very different builds, and I think their structure has dictated some of their builds, but they all have very similar qualities, and they have really, really full quads, full delts. I mean, they have that really round look too.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a lot to be said about training styles and training partners and how they develop as well, from more than just an anthropometric standpoint. Like, yes, anthropometrics will probably trump all, maybe, but I don't know.
That's another rabbit hole.
Yeah.
You'd think anthropometrics trump all, but I don't know. Like maybe you do a certain rep style long enough and I don't know, maybe your fibers change in just such a way that ends up being ideal for you, whereas it maybe wasn't before, but you just decided to kind of force it.
Speaking of that, which as a tangent I don't want to get into right now, but I think we could talk about long-term, the fiber changing. It's an interesting thing how many very good bodybuilders, female, male, across all the sports, were long distance runners when they were younger.
Really?
Yeah. And then what made me think of this was that killer Sally, because she was like a cross country runner, and then Dave Palumbo was, and Jordan Janowitz was, and there's a lot, quite a bit of people they don't talk about them. And it's not like they were like had a career, but in my mind I would feel like anyone. My first thought would be, oh, you ran cross country for 4 years in high school. There's no chance of you being a bodybuilder. But it seems to be not the case at all. So much so that it seems like quite a bit of former good long distance runners, and a lot. I feel like almost a majority of my female clients ran cross country. It seems like when they were younger.
We think about some of the things that happen physiologically that are associated with aerobic training, right? And I think that it lays a really, really good physiological foundation for supplying muscles with what they need to grow. Vascularization, mitochondrial density. I mean, you're building in a structure that basically says we need nutrients. Let's get stuff to the muscle and can do it.
Yeah.
And I think that really lays a scaffolding for growth more than.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good topic to delve into long term, because Palumbo always for years he would write that was he succeeded despite that. And I always thought it was interesting because, that would have been my first thought too. But then the more I thought about it, I was like, I wonder how much of his success was actually because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably for reasons like you just said.
You're laying the groundwork. I feel like when I did my half iron training was also when I grew the most, aside from maybe like this last rebound, to be honest. And I don't know if it was just because that was like where my heart was at the time or what, but there was something about that training style that really led to growth. Now, it also may have been, I didn't have a super, super long training history at that point. So there was less of that kind of interference, but I definitely feel like, especially when it came to legs, like going in, hitting a hard leg workout and then doing your sprints and then timing your long, slow run for your brick, like the next day. I don't know.
No, I agree. One of the hardest thing I have in convincing my larger male competitors is that looking back over my competitive career, my best progress always came from when I was actually doing cardio in the off season. And I recommend cardio in the off season, HIIT cardio, a modified version of HIIT that's kind of geared to mimic. Basically, you push for a minute, don't go lighter for a minute, which is kind of to mimic like a 20 rep set of squats. I just want to make sure when you're doing high rep leg or back work, your lungs aren't the fail point, and maybe boost appetite a little bit.
Yeah.
But the ones who actually do that seem to progress better. So much so that when I've had a number of people recently even who I would be like, man, I was really hoping we get more out of their off season this time, or that we got more of the first off season I worked with them. And they like at some point they'll kind of confide in me that, yeah, I kind of fell off pace with the cardio. And, and I won't like dog them or anything, but it's like, like I'm starting to build a decent sample size of that's showing that. It's like, I feel like my clients who sign on, who are going to, the first off season they work with me, they follow everything. They're paying this money, they're following everything, and it's like, okay, you have this really good off season, but then they learn more. They kind of know my practices, and they kind of like, you can kind of sense where they're like, wow, is that 12 minutes a hit really that important? And then you'll notice it's like, geez, we're not getting what I thought we were going to get this off season, and it seems like, at least enough to be noticeable sample size that's what's going on. And I know for myself that my gains were always better when I did cardio in off season, even though I absolutely hated doing cardio. So I think that's really an interesting topic.
It's interesting too. I mean, Dave's darn near 300 pounds right now, and he'll finish a 20 rep something like leg press or, really long pause set. Sorry, I'm making this brutal on you these days. And he pops up and he's like, yeah, he'll laugh or he'll get up and pop off, and people just laugh. They're like, he's like talking to them saying thanks like right away. Like our best friends occasionally train with us, and they laugh because Dave will hop off and say thanks, and Nick's like, yeah, no problem, buddy. You literally should be dying right now. But that cardio has definitely allowed him to push a little bit longer. And I think the bigger you get, the more important it becomes, probably.
Yeah. And I feel like the bigger I get, the more 1 12-minute session probably gives me adaptation wise, because 12 minutes a hit is kind of a bitch when you're almost 300 pounds. But I mean, it's just 12 minutes. Like, do it.
It's 6 minutes, really. Like if you really think about it, yeah. But and I think, like you said initially, we started talking about this legs. That's what what I was going to say is, what I try to use as an example is if I think back who's got like the freakiest legs, there's like Big Ramy, but aside from him, I would like Ronnie Coleman at his peak and Kai Green at his largest. And both of them, Kai Green started every workout with 15 minutes on the step mill at 300 pounds. Like guys worry about, the guys don't want to do the step mill in contest prep because they think they're going to lose size. And you got the world's biggest legs doing it before every workout. And same thing, I think Cost of Redemption, Ronnie Coleman, the day he does 800 for 2 on squats, I believe, it's been a long time since I've seen it, but I believe that same day he goes back in his home gym and does 45 minutes on the step mill, a couple, like 3 or 4 hours after the leg workout. And so, these guys, that's 45 minutes on the step mill in the off season with those legs. And so I think rather than...
Do you have guys who actually do need to hold back on cardio if they're really trying to put on size?
No. No, I'm sure they exist. No, most guys that worry about that are, very rarely. Every once in a while, you get someone who's so obsessed with staying lean and they kind of obsess about cardio, but that is the very, very, very extreme exception. Almost to a person, like 99.9% of men let themselves get fat, worry so much about losing muscle size from cardio that they hold themselves back on muscle size. I see that more in if you go to a gym and see your perma-bulker who hasn't added muscle year after year after year, I would say if I could pick one thing, it would be they won't diet down, so they never get a rebound, they never get lean, they spend their entire year outside of the optimal anabolic body fat range, and they're scared to death of doing cardio. And they think those things are helping them grow, and all three of them are holding them back worse than anything else they're doing.
What are other topics we're going to talk about?
We got one more topic about, I'll introduce this one, overdevelopment.
Oh, yeah. And we'll frame it.
Yeah, so this last topic is about just broadly overdevelopment or supposed overdevelopment of certain parts of your body. And there are a couple of different directions we can take this, but the first is, I think, basically a conversation Danny was having with some other ladies at the gym. Do you want to go more into that?
Yeah, so I was talking to a couple girls at the gym this weekend, and they were two of the pros, and one was pro in both figure and physique. And I said, what do you want to do? She said, well, I don't want to get big for physique, so I'm going to stay figure, but it means that she's a former powerlifter, kind of like myself. She said, well, I can't I can't do deadlifts anymore. I can't train back really heavy anymore because I'm going to get too big for figure. So I do sets of like 20 on my pull downs. And I mean, I see where she's at. I do think that there's a need for balance in these divisions, and you go to the top pro level and they're all talking about, being underdeveloped and balanced and stuff like that. But I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like you really have to try to try to outgrow, especially these women's divisions where ratios are so demanding.
Yeah, right now, yeah, right.
Try.
Millions of hearts are breaking right now around the world of people who desperately want to add muscle mass. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not that easy. It's not like,
It's nuts.
Yeah.
and you'd think the people in the sport that worked so hard to build the muscle they have would realize that like they're not going to accidentally do one set too hard and be too big.
It's funny too, because like it's hard enough for guys to gain muscle when they're taking like tons of stuff and they have the men's hormonal environment from birth.
Yeah.
Then you have women worrying about this, taking a fraction of the gear, not having had that hormonal environment from birth. It's like maybe it's just because I don't know the women's divisions as well, but off the top of my head, I can think of one person who's really had to hold back, and that's Michaela Aycock.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that was probably more so that her legs could come up, more so that the rest of her wouldn't grow. So she just
and actually it was super interesting. I think her legs came up after her hernia surgery, also because she was resensitized and because her bracing was that much better.
Oh, interesting.
And so we think about like, we had a conversation before this podcast tonight. It might be a topic for a different day, just with regards to the waist trainer and bracing and how our abdominal control affects pelvic floor and our ability to actually get output through our legs. So she'd be an interesting one to look at from that standpoint. But just from a development standpoint, I'm like, I work really hard and I feel like I'm way too small and will perpetually be too small. Like, I don't know that many women are going to outgrow.
Yeah, there's a lot of things like the wide waist. The people worry about deadlifts and things like that. And I've been around people gaining and losing size long enough for the most part, people become bigger or smaller silhouettes of themselves. I mean, you see Flex Wheeler at 16 years old. He looks like Flex Wheeler, just a much, much smaller version. Ronnie Coleman looks like Ronnie Coleman. It's not like you get a guy doesn't look like Flex Wheeler who grew up looking like a gargoyle. It wasn't like a blocky, wide-waisted, big joint. You know what I mean? And that's really the case. You don't change your muscle insertions. You don't change your muscle length. You don't change you. And as far as like the blocky waist thing, I think a couple things with that. I just always felt like, okay, I've never seen someone with I've never seen a Brian Buchanan turn into a really blocky waist. I've never seen someone with a tiny waist start squatting, start deadlifting, and then boom, suddenly they're a block. No, and I think part of it was probably decades ago when no one really knew much about what was going on. And in decades, we're not going to know anything currently, but 50s, 60s, the sport was early. Training methods were really rudimentary. It wasn't a lot of logic or science behind it. And you looked at the guys who were probably naturally good squatters and deadlifters probably were blocky people, and so that was like, John over here that's really good at squatting has a wide waist, therefore I don't want to squat because I'll get a wide waist. Not think, and if you think like what changes, you're not changing your organs, you're not changing your bone structure, so muscles are growing or not growing. And there's only, the transverse abdominis, the obliques, and the abs, for one, there's only so much they can grow. They're small muscles. And two, those muscles, they're not getting that heavy, they're not getting the hypertrophy response. Like your rectus abdominis or obliques, they're not getting a ton of workload and like a hypertrophy type workload by bracing. I mean, there's obviously some work going on, but so like you said, but I don't want to take this as my own idea. This is what we talked about earlier. Like when you were talking about earlier, it's probably like the erectors. So from the side, your erectors are going to be bigger, and you can see, and that is definitely true. But I don't think that's what people are talking about. I think people are talking about wide waist, looking blocky, and I think I don't think.
I think one thing that can contribute to that is that there are times where an overdevelopment for two different scenarios. Some of the girls that I train that are wellness competitors, I can't have them doing too many deadlifts, because if they do get super erect or dominant, if they want to pull sumo, great, fine. They need the adductor and hamstring development anyway. But pulling conventional, for example, and making their erectors that big on their side posts is going to throw off the ratios significantly. But I also think that for a lot of men in particular who maybe have like developed glutes, but you know that look where they're just like, their glutes are just tight. That a lot of times is a pelvic floor issue that's secondary to overdeveloped erectors, which can make it really, really tough to actually control your transverse abdominis, and you can become too rectus abdominis dominant in your bracing. So some of these patterns that we access in training can actually influence our bracing strategies and our posing in ways that aren't necessarily like direct, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. In that kind of case, is having that person say not deadlift the best solution, or is it just the solution that you go to at a time when they can't necessarily do the movement without making the postural problem, for lack of a better phrase, worse?
I think it's phasic. And I'll just use myself as an example because I can. Like I'll deadlift conventional really heavy for maybe 8 weeks at a time. And throughout that 8-week period, I will feel more and more that my body starts to shift into a position that gets harder and harder for me to actually find transverse abdominis for waist control. But you pull out of that pattern phasically. And I think it fluctuates far more than people think it does.
Yeah. But that kind of makes me think of another subtopic here, is that I think that people worry about supposed overdevelopment of an area, and then it leads them to make decisions about how they train. And it might be a valid change to make in your training to say not deadlift at the moment or not squat or whatever. But I don't think you should do it because you're worried about like your waist becoming wide. Like the bone structure of your waist is not going to change. But if you're already at a point where like you're super muscular, you don't have a ton of size left to gain, but you do actually have a weak body part, which is a rare case to begin with. But if you get there, then maybe it's just that there's only so much muscle you can gain in a given amount of time. There's only so much training you can do in a week. So it's like, am I going to trash my recovery squatting and deadlifting? Or if my arms are weak, am I going to do less squatting and deadlifting so I can bring up my arm?
Yeah. Or like, it's not deadlifts. It's that if your erectors are too thick, you're not going to train erectors. It's not necessarily the deadlifts. Deadlifts train erectors, but you're not going to do anything to work the erectors in that case because it's going to create. So, and then in that case, you could create the same problem of a thick waist from the side with thick erectors by not deadlifting at all, but doing. If you could find the right combination,
Yeah.
I don't ever want to worry about having my erectors be too big. I think I'll just take the knock if it's a knock.
The nice thing with like women do have, like the women's divisions are, there's more emphasis on specific developments like side delt size or lat size. But for the men, it's really not. I mean, there's like 5 mass monsters on earth that would, like Big Ramy had to worry about his legs being a little too big.
Yeah.
Who's another person? There's it just doesn't happen either. What's that?
I was going to say Marcus Roll.
Yeah, like his delts, and then you could argue why they were so big, but but like as a guy, it's much easier because it's like that just doesn't happen. There is like a more specific, and in classic, it's a little bit, but really like the classic look now is almost. I don't want to get off on tangent, but it's almost like a purely genetic look now. It's even more. It's like you're either born with a certain type of look. You can't train to become C-bum. All the kids in the world that want to, that shoulder to waist differential, the way the muscles insert, and it's a really. Well, I don't want to get on tangent, but it's a real interesting look because as a coach, what that look is like a weird, flat, super dry, not really full. Because if you've seen him full, he looks like a bodybuilder. It's a really interesting.
He turned pro as a bodybuilder.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's how it should be. Like classic being a very genetically driven vision. I mean, because it's about shape. You can't reshape yourself.
Yeah. Very minimally. I mean, you can make muscles slightly bigger, but for the most part, there's so much systemic growth that happens just from training and eating and using PEDs that there's even a limit to what you can do on that.
I mean, I do feel like if you have a certain shape, it'll come out more as you grow. And I feel like I'm starting to experience this because like if there's like one end of the spectrum where you've got, I don't know, awesome like black guy muscle bellies where you look huge even when you're sub 200 pounds, I'm like the opposite end of that to where I don't look big and I don't look big until I'm like 250 plus on stage.
Yeah.
But so like I'm like finally starting to see some upper body shape in particular come out that just kind of wasn't there before, even though like there's some density there. So, but that's just something if that's you, you'll realize that over the course of adding mass. It's not like something you need to worry about outside of get bigger.
That's an interesting genetic thing too, because I'm similar to that, in that, like, you just have to be really, really big. It's weird because it shows on stage. To like some guys that look good by themselves, they say you can't judge a competition because you see a guy post by himself and they look amazing, but then they stand next to people and their flaws really come out. Yours will kind of be the opposite. Looking good by yourself is really difficult because you have to be, you have like a frame that just needs to be really, really large.
Yeah.
When you stand on stage next to someone and you're 260 in shape, that's obvious, and that's where, like, it's so it's an interesting thing. It's like some guys you'll see them post online, and social media has really kind of ruined the sport in that way. And that some guys, the guys that look like a flex wheeler at 213 pounds, like he could post a picture of himself on Instagram today and it'd be like, oh my God, this guy's going to win Mr. Olympia. No one else even show up. When he gets on stage, he is still 213. This is late 80s, early 90s. He is still 213 pounds, and the flaws come out. Like a guy like a Dorian Yates now is obviously 50 pounds bigger than him. So I always thought that was an interesting thing, because for me personally, not to make it about myself, but that's what I always felt like, because, like I'd post pictures online and it's like, God, you can see, like things are coming along, but there's a massive difference between me and the pro level. But it's like, but I'm 270 pounds and I'm lean. How is this? But then you get pictures of yourself on stage standing next to people and you're like, holy crap, yeah, I am 260 pounds.
It's really interesting to see what you look like on stage your next show.
Yeah. Hopefully it's good. I'll have a year and a half of off season this time, so hopefully it has time to solidify.
Yeah, you'll be. I mean, geez, you're almost 300 pounds right now, and you're not fat, so it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, actually, I'm curious now. So we were all at Swiss a couple weeks ago, and you actually saw Dave in person. And at one point, you just go, "Dave, you are enormous."
He's fucking big. He's thick. You look like a truck.
Yeah, he's a big boy.
Yeah, no, you're well, because you even got that like waddle walk. Like you could tell.
Oh
like,
yeah, my adductors keep growing.
Yeah, it's yeah. You're like those bully breeds, the bull.
Yeah, we walk through the grocery store, and every time I walk behind him, I'm like, it's great because everyone just parts like the Red Sea. Like we can be in Walmart on a Saturday night where it's busy and there are kids crying and screaming and everything's chaos, and Dave just walks through with his cart, and I'm just gonna stay behind him.
Yeah, no, it's funny thinking back to like the 180-pound pics when we first started.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, gosh, when I got down to,
I even pulled up pictures of when it wasn't even when you were, because he did Classic for his first show, and it was before prep. It was probably when he just started with you. It was one of our anniversaries, and I pulled up pictures, and we thought he was big then. We kind of laugh now because that was 60 pounds ago.
Yeah, well, I mean, you gain like 10 pounds of muscle, and everybody around you starts saying that you're like big and on gear, like, because most people have no concept of this whole world. But
it's gonna be interesting to see you on stage, that's for sure.
Kind of looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think it'll be over 260. I would expect.
That'd be awesome. Well, the off-season parts being 300 is not as awesome, but
yeah, because you're gonna be 300 pounds for a full year, because you're 292ish right now, and you're starting to lose the excess water, and the weight's not really going down. So it's you're gonna be 300.
Yep.
Same.
Yeah.
Just kidding. Let's not do that.
What was that guy's name that tried to do that? That's like in the 60s, Doug something. What's funny is I think they got it like he bulked. He was like an Olympic lifter too, but he bulked like 410 pounds, and then when he dieted down, it was the exact same weight again, only just with stretch marks.
Was it Doug Furness?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, but I think it's funny because like if you really were to do that properly, it would be the opposite. It would not be bulk up and then cut down. It would be starve yourself until you were nearly dead, and then grow. Like like the world's most dramatic rebound, I think, would be much more effective than getting super fat and then trying to cut down.
Yeah. I was trying to think, because we're going back to Colorado over Thanksgiving, and we're going to see my brother and sister-in-law, and it's the first they've really seen Dave since
2019.
Yeah, right before we started with you, and I feel like they're going to be like, what are you? They're both small people. Like, I think I weigh more than my brother does.
You do, yeah.
Which isn't saying a whole lot, I hope, but it's going to be interesting. And I was thinking about how to frame that in terms of just like, well, he got really, really lean. His insulin sensitivity was awesome. You put on a size.
It's glandular.
It's gland.
Glandular. Gross.
Is that a Family Guy line?
I think so. It's something else.
Followed by one of those cutaways.
It's glandular. Yeah.
You get the fat guy walking with the tuba behind him.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that just happened. We just said the word glandular 6
Glandular.
times. Glandular. If we could never say that again, that'd be great.
Pre-kid, I thought, isn't it funny when people cite a thyroid problem? Like, there's a really cheap pill for that. I usually
Yeah. And that's the first thing doctors prescribe. If you're a female, you're over age of 30, and there's any sign of an elevated TSH, Hashimoto's T4.
Yeah.
The dog's on T4.
Well, he probably is.
He's got a glandular.
Yeah. And old.
God.
Well, it's funny. Like, I think we're at our 20-minute mark, so we're kind of done with it. But it's funny, the average person's like vocabulary with things like physiology and stuff is one of my, because my wife's, my family's all big, across the board. Everyone's big, and my wife's family's obviously not. But when we were first dating, and my wife met like my extended family at some holiday or something, one of my uncles goes, you ever had a weight problem? And she's like, no, I've never. You got one of the metabolisms I've been reading about.
One of the metabolisms.
Well, I think he thought like if you had a metabolism, you were naturally thin. If you were naturally thin, it was like a thing you caught, like you caught it. You caught that metabolism, didn't it?
Awesome.
Wow. Next time we both prep, we're just going to say we caught a metabolism.
Oh man, I hope so. I need to catch one.
What about you? Are you training these days, or what are you doing? Still?
Nothing. I'm working. I mean, I keep saying, like, you see how Jeff Bezos got all ripped now? That's my goal now. Once the business stuff is done, I'm going to go back and come
to Texas and hang out with us. Everyone at Hidden asks about you every week.
I want to. It's embarrassing because I don't. I train. I'll always train. It's but it's not. I work out. I don't train. You know what I mean? There's a very very big because I work. I did back today. I did like DC rows, some pull ups, bent over rows, and shrugs. It's just I go in, get it done. It's still like the worst thing I ever did, I think, was building a full gym in the house because. Now I'm 5 steps away from a workout, but that workout is the kind of workout you do when you only take 5 steps to get there. It's what's that psychological thing? Like the harder the initiation, the more you want to believe the thing is good. My initiation is going downstairs rather than driving somewhere. So, but I don't know. I'll get back to it. I'm not. This is the most pathetic I've ever been as a athlete. That's
right. Just the worse you let yourself slide, the bigger the comeback will be. Just
yeah. Well, that's what's traditionally always happened is like I'll like weightlifting, bodybuilding, and that's been. I go through phases and I get really obsessed and interested in things like guitar, or piano, or like I've been playing pool lately, or anything like physics, math. And I'll go through like a phase where I'm like really into something, but like underneath it all, since I was a kid, there's always been weightlifting. And it's always like there's a point where I get, and then I pass a mirror and I'm like, oh my God, that's disgusting. How did this happen? And then it's like a switch. And then I wake up the next day and I'm as obsessed as I've ever been. I keep waiting for that to happen. It usually happens around this time. So hopefully any day now I'm going to wake up.
You're going to wake up, walk past the mirror and know.
Maybe it's like a couple more Snickers bars away from it.
Yeah. That's the problem is I'm not eating terrible. I need to just completely let go, develop alcoholism. I'm still like eating. It's been like such a part of my life. I'm still doing the meat and rice, even like if I order Grubhub, which I do pretty often, there's a Mexican place in town that does shrimp and rice and carne asada with, steak, rice, and refried beans. And so even like when I'm eating like crap, it's still close enough to not completely go off the rails. I need to just go on a full out bender, just like a month of booze and chicken wings.
That sounds great.
It does. Why am I trying to talk myself into it? I'm sold.
Do it.
Yeah.
That sounds awesome.
I'm going to come back episode 41 and
you're going to have the deep flow going on.
Look like, cheeks out here.
All right. Well, are we ready to wrap up the recording for the night?
We are, yeah.
All right, cool. Well, hey, again, guys, thanks for listening. Friendly reminder, drop us comments, questions, anything else you want us to touch on below. We try to get our topics from y'all. Otherwise, they're from people that we talk to in the gym. And check out Team Troponin and First Attachment Nutrition for more information on both these supplements as well as these sites.
And pericardial space, not pleural space.
Right. Pericardial, not plural.
That's been bothering me.
In the video notes too.
Yeah.
All right, guys. See y'all later.
See ya.
For more content like this, visit www.teamtroponin.com.
This video is brought to you by First Attachment Nutrition, battle-tested nutrition, expert formulated supplements. Join the First Attachment revolution.